For the show at the Calderone Theater in Hempstead, Long Island on May 17, 1980, where Wendy blew up a Mustang Mach II, Stiff flew members of the British music press over to see the show in order to promote the band's UK debut, where they'd been booked to headline London's famed Hammersmith Odeon. The explosion at the Calderone was huge, with a fireball that filled the stage and put the hood of the car straight up over 40 feet into the air as Wendy stood triumphant in its midst. The entire band and crew flew to London for the sold-out Hammersmith Odeon show, and Wendy, who had changed into a nurse's uniform on the plane, announced to the throng of reporters who had come to meet her at the airport, interested in what this anarchist had to say, that she had come to the UK to give it a cultural enema.
The press was already onto them as soon as they landed in this country. I can remember the Sun and the Daily Sport, you know, don't let your children go to this show, and then afterwards, all of them wanting to do photo shoots.
All went well until the day of the show when the Greater London Council, or GLC, announced they wanted to see a further demonstration of the way the car would be detonated. It turned out later they had already made up their minds to ban the show.
And the Hammersmith Odeon is not a small gig, it's a big gig, a prestige gig. For it to be cancelled, you know, that's like they must have been really scared.
Like many other people from the UK, I bought a ticket. I think it's before I actually became a journalist. I was just a man in the street, boy in the street. Bought a ticket, was very disappointed when the show got cancelled because I love the over-the-top tradition. I love the big stage shows. I love the fact they're going to blow up a car on stage.
I don't know if you know the story about that as well. The GLC came down at 3 o'clock in the afternoon and demanded to see everything of the stage show. But at 12 o'clock that day, they'd already released a press release to the press saying that the show was cancelled. And they went through this whole bureaucratic rigmarole so that they could finally turn around and say, no, you're not doing the show. And it's just, you know, it's just disgusting. And I still have my ticket to that Plasmatics show that was cancelled on August the 8th, 1980, thanks to the stinking GLC.
Banned in the UK, but with an album coming out in the States where Stiff America had scheduled a release and a full-blown US tour to go to the West Coast for the first time, and in a haze of jet lag on the plane back, plans were already underway to work off the frustration of the UK Hammersmith banning and get the momentum back. Wendy had commented to a reporter matter-of-factly that blowing up a whole stage would seem to be the next logical step, and on the way back on the plane from London, Rod was saying to Wendy, "You know that idea about blowing up a whole stage?" By the time they landed in New York, the plans for Pier 62 were underway. Wendy would drive a brakeless Cadillac toward the stage loaded with explosives, jumping out moments before the car would hit the stage, and the stage and all the equipment on it would blow up. The permits were hard to get, and even then only allowed for an estimated 5,000 to 6,000 people. On the day of the performance, however, over 25,000 showed up, jamming the downtown streets and lining the rooftops. Crowd control was brought in from all over the city, and although fire hoses were used to disperse the crowd afterwards, there were no injuries except to Wendy, who had suffered a minor hip bruise. The event was covered by all the local TV stations as well as the Evening News Live. Even though it cost virtually the entire advance of the U.S. release of New Hope to do it, Wendy was quoted by a reporter from the Associated Press as saying, "It was worth every penny because it showed that these are just things and people shouldn't worship them." It was a point she'd repeat more than once. In the earliest days of the band, Rod did almost all of the bookings of the live shows himself, but as demand and logistics increased, independent agent and kindred spirit Jim Kramer was brought onto the team as booking agent.
One of the band I did a lot of work with, and their manager owned the CBGBs. His name was Hilly Crystal. And he knew Rod, and he said I should give Rod a call. So that's how it happened. And the rest is history.
Wendy and the Plasmatics' debut in the LA market was at the famed Whiskey A Go-Go, where 2 nights were extended to 3 and then extended to 4, all of which sold out with lines, as in New York, stretching around the block.
The Whiskey in LA was hello to LA media. I mean, that's what you did the Whiskey for. The left and right coasts both had their little premier showcased venues where you had to play. But these people in LA had never seen anything like this.
I hadn't never heard anything that extreme. And there wasn't anything that extreme. I can't think of any precedents for the over-the-top energy of the Plasmatics.
We got so much press that for a band that didn't really have like a major album release or anything else, we were able to come back into LA, a hard place to get bookings, and put ourselves in the Santa Monica Civic. That's a heck of a thing to do. And it was very good for a guy like me to be able to have a part of that, because that was an impressive move.
Following the whiskey, there were more East Coast dates, Malibu and Long Island, where Wendy trashed a washing machine, dates in Albany, Boston, and Washington, D.C., and Emerald City in Cherry Hill, New Jersey, a Philadelphia venue where, to the frantic sound of corruption, she blew up a sports car. In the meantime, Avalon Attractions was bringing Wendy and the band back into the LA market just 6 weeks after their 4-night stand at the Whiskey to headline Santa Monica Civic Center. On November 30th, 1980, Wendy shaved her hair into a mohawk, something she'd wanted to do since before the forming of the band, but diligently held off until the public became more aware of her the other way, with the belief that it would be a stronger statement. It must be pointed out that before the Plasmatics, there were no bands with mohawks, and before Wendy, certainly no women at all in the public eye with mohawks. Most generally speaking, no one had ever seen a woman with a mohawk, period. The haircuts, whether at CBGB in New York or the Whiskey in LA, prior to Wendy and the Plasmatics, looked more like Beatle haircuts than anything else. Long hairs were mostly heavy metal followers, and punks and heavy metalers despised each other. In any case, when Wendy cut her hair in a mohawk, the result was shocking.
Like, you have all these cosmetic companies dictating to you what you're supposed to look like, how you're supposed to act. This is, consensus programming. And that's one reason 3 years ago now, I cut my hair like this, because I'd never seen a woman with a hairdo like this. I'm saying fuck you to all the cosmetic companies.
With Wendy, band, and crew out in LA, the day before the sellout show at the Santa Monica Civic, all systems were go. That is, until the phones began to ring.
I remember being in my office and being called by the promoter saying they're not going to be able to do the show, the day of the show. The fire department apparently had so many issues and concerns because of whatever, and it was a hairy time. I mean, I remember screaming at these promoters that night from my office. I'm ready to go home. It was like 3 in the afternoon in LA, and they're saying no show. I was freaked out. And I remember getting a hold of Rod at the hotel in LA. I was in New York, and I explained to him what was going on. He got on the phone with both the promoter and the fire marshal and managed to somehow or another mollify everybody, convince everybody that we knew what we were doing, and it worked out to where we actually got to do the show after all.
What he did was offer to do a demonstration for the fire department out in the parking lot of the Civic Center. George Pearson was crew boss, sound man, and production manager at the time.
We had to do a demonstration in the afternoon out in the parking lot for the fire marshal with half the charges. That we then double chart and double it up when we got the actual show time. And swear it was the same charge that we had used in the parking lot. It just looked bigger indoors.
At the last minute, the local authorities gave the green light, and Wendy appeared on stage for the first time on the West Coast with a mohawk and demolished a white caddy. As in New York, the show was the place to be for trendsetters and wannabe trendsetters alike, among them Van Halen's David Lee Roth, who had his picture taken with Wendy alongside the demolished caddy after the show. In the meantime, ABC's show Fridays, which was looking to be a more cutting-edge version of Saturday Night Live only on Friday nights, booked Wendy and the Plasmatics to appear roughly 4 weeks later and go live on nationwide TV. The group had toured its way through Arizona, Texas, and to Minneapolis, from where it flew back to LA to do the show. Rod was still negotiating with censors minutes before the show, who were panicking about what Wendy was going to wear, which was simply a tank top, and what she had written across it, which was, "Don't be a wanker." They were concerned her nipples might protrude through the shirt and insisted they be taped flat underneath with masking tape. Finally, someone in New York okayed the word wanker, and the show, which featured 2 songs, Living Dead, where Wendy sledgehammered a TV set, and then Butcher Baby, where Wendy chainsawed through a guitar and then shot down a lighting truss with a shotgun, was set to go. The landmark show, the first time ever a woman with a mohawk appeared on national TV, among other things, began with Wendy grabbing the mic and commanding, "All right, America, turn up your TV sets."
Conservatives across America all suddenly had castration anxiety when they saw Wendy Williams wielding a chainsaw.
The final arbiter of the threat a band poses to the establishment, Chris Knowles wrote in Classic Rock about Wendy and the Plasmatics, is how the establishment ultimately reacts to their provocations. And 2 days after the Friday show, the resistance or reaction would reach a new level. The day after Fridays, the band played a sold-out show in Chicago and arrived the following day to play the Palms in Milwaukee.
We had a show at the Palms. was supposed to be a show like every other show. You go, you perform, you go home, go back to the hotel and go on to the next one. The police had seen Wendy on national TV and had worked themselves up into some kind of a fervor that they were going to stop this heinous activity as soon as they could right away, right now, not going past Milwaukee. So they decided, probably, in my opinion, even before they went to the show, they knew they were going to arrest people.
Immediately after the show, a crew member came running back to Rod, who was still at the soundboard, to say that Wendy had been arrested. Rod went back to the dressing room, which was filled with plainclothes police. They said Wendy had been arrested on a local obscenity charge, and they needed to take her downtown to be booked. They said there would be no body search, so no female police officer was needed, and that Wendy could get out that night. Rod went to settle the box office with the promoter, so he'd have money in case there was a bail to be posted, when another crew member came running in to say the police were beating Wendy up outside. Rod raced through the venue and out the back door, where he saw Wendy being held on the snow and ice-covered ground and kicked in the face by a 300-plus-pound man, later identified as Detective Remus, while others held her down. A large phalanx of police in riot gear attempted to surround the perimeter to keep people from seeing what was going on. Breaking through the phalanx, Rod attempted to intervene, pulling police off of Wendy until he himself was overpowered and dragged off behind a car and beaten into semi-consciousness. Wendy was thrown, t-shirt pulled up over her exposed breasts, into a paddy wagon, where after a long delay in freezing winter temperatures, lying in a pool of blood, she was taken to the hospital where she was treated and then thrown into jail. Rod was similarly taken to the hospital and then to jail, although the two were not kept together. Wendy, aware at one point that Rod was down the hall in the hospital, asked what had happened to him and was told he slipped on the ice. Both were charged with assaulting a police officer, a felony. Others were arrested on lesser charges, and still others threatened with arrest that night in an effort to keep the crowd away.
I mean, the Sex Pistols came to America and the people yawned. Nobody cared. Nobody cared when the Sex Pistols came to America. They were a joke. And the Plasmatics, you know, were not only not a joke, but they were extremely frightening. The furor that the Plasmatics caused really hadn't been seen since the late 60s. The Plasmatics was sort of almost the test case for repressing something that was seen as a direct threat to the status quo.
In an interview with Cream Magazine's Edouard Dauphin and elsewhere, Wendy gave an account of what happened. As soon as they escorted me outside the venue, she said, the atmosphere changed dramatically. I was aware of this wall of police keeping people away. Wendy was forced to walk a gauntlet where the remarks began. Nice knockers, and do you like orgies? And what is your band, all niggers and queers? As she stepped up onto the paddy wagon steps, she felt a pair of hands reach up under her shirt and grab her breasts. In self-defense, she turned around and with an open hand slapping the offending officer in the face and saying, "Get your fucking hands off me." By this time, she'd been thrown to the ground and was being beaten, kicked, and groped. Nobody slept that night, and production manager and crew boss George Pearson spent the night waking people on both coasts, agents, lawyers, whomever he could, to try and get Wendy and Rod out of jail while the police were giving him the runaround.
Because they had beat them up, they started shuffling from jail to jail and place to place, so I could never catch up with them to try and get them bailed out or find out what was going on for almost 36 hours. They were running me around and I was like tromping all over Milwaukee to this courthouse, to here, to there, to see this guy, and they were just basically running me around in circles while they kept moving them around waiting for swelling to go down and that sort of thing. The band holed up in the hotel rooms, nobody knowing what's going on.
With Wendy and Rod in jail, the show in Cleveland the next night couldn't go on as planned, but the promoter wanted to put the show on the following night. Rod was for ending the tour since the group had to be in Europe in 14 days and they needed time to heal and regroup, but Wendy insisted on doing the show, black eye, stitches and all, not wanting to give an inch to the forces that had tried to shut her down.
You know, trooper that she was, Wendy wanted to keep on playing on that tour. We were supposed to play in Cleveland.
The show went on, but Wendy collapsed before the encore and had to be taken to the hospital. She was released, but in the morning, before she could leave town, she was arrested by the Cleveland police for the performance she'd done the night before, supposedly for doing a sadomasochistic dance with a sledgehammer. To the credit of the Cleveland Police Department, in this case, there were no beatings or gropings, and Wendy was out on bail within a few hours. Within a few short days, the dynamics had ratcheted up. There were now mammoth legal fees on the horizon, and possible jail time in the Milwaukee case, where it was the word of the police who denied the entire thing against Wendy and the band.
Yeah, and it was a scary time, but it was a scary time because it was kind of like, you know, us against them, and we were worried in every town we were going to be playing in.
If it weren't for the photo by photographer Al Gartsky and a number of courageous witnesses who stepped forward and contacted lawyer Peter Donahue, things would have looked darker than they did.
Because we were always followed by media and stuff, a photographer from out there caught wind of the whole thing going down, and when they came out and the whole thing ensued, he was right there and got pictures of the whole everything and beating the hell out of her and all this stuff. that didn't jive with the story that they then gave later.
They were seen as subversive, you know, at a time where repression was back in fashion. The status quo wanted to put the, you know, put the straps back on.
When the Plasmatics and Wendy were getting a lot of television exposure and a lot of more mainstream, widespread exposure, the 80s were steeped in a real capitalistic greed. And Wendy was standing in direct opposition to all of these material things that people were buying. She said it in a television interview, I think also, that the point of doing that is to prove that they were just things. And her decimating all of those symbols probably really struck a chord with people who had completely bought into that mindset and had completely probably thought they were emotionally fulfilling themselves by having these things. Aside from the fact that Wendy was one of the only women doing what she was the only woman doing what she did, couple that with the idea that people had never seen a woman with a mohawk, let alone seen a woman behave like Wendy did on stage. And I think a lot of that, the fright of that, contributed to a lot of the violence, particularly with police. And I'm sure that men, particularly men in smaller towns and suburbs, were very, very threatened by that.
The fact they were female fronted by someone who had a brain, clearly a very powerful, self-contained person who wouldn't take any shit from anybody and was unafraid to put it sing about it on the records, you know, and was prepared to go to the nth degree. You know, I think that threatens people, definitely, and I think it threatens people actually in quite a good way, because I think that, you know, rock and roll is all about standing up for what you believe in. That's what I always thought it was.